If a man empties his purse into his head, no one can take it away from him. Benjamin Franklin. My friends, in this episode, I want to bring you something interesting and even show you how self-learning can save you, support you, ensure you, and even correct mistakes in your life. In other words, just like the title of this episode says, how wonderful self-learning really is. So let me start proving how amazing self-learning can be for our lives with a very random question. Do you think drinking coffee at 11 a.m. is okay or not? Almost noon, right? A little coffee to stay awake. Besides, 11:30 a.m. is still early. Why not have a cup? It's not nighttime yet. Right? If we say drinking at night, that's different. You can't sleep. That makes sense. But 11 a.m.? That's harmless. In fact, many people even have another cup at 2 or 3 in the afternoon just to stay alert. Some of us drink 3 cups a day, right? And honestly, by this time in the morning, a lot of people already feel their energy dropping. When energy drops, coffee makes sense. Nothing wrong with it. If not coffee, then tea. If not tea, then maybe an energy drink. Basically, caffeine. Am I right? So what does all this have to do with today's topic? Here's the thing. Self-learning has taught me something very important. That this habit, drinking coffee the way I just described, is actually serious. Serious in a very real way. Why? Let me explain. Remember this. Serious in a serious way. Because it affects your emotions. It affects whether you feel positive or negative, whether you feel sluggish or full of energy. Serious? Of course it's serious. And it deserves to be taken seriously. Now let me explain in a fun way. In our brain, there's a natural chemical called adenosine. This adenosine builds up while we're awake. The longer we're awake, the more adenosine accumulates and the sleepier we feel. Eventually, when enough adenosine builds up, we get that very helpful feeling. The desire to sleep. That drowsy, heavy-eyed feeling, that's thanks to adenosine. So adenosine is actually wonderful because it helps us want to go to sleep. And if you don't have a sleep disorder, somewhere between 12 to 16 hours after waking up, you'll feel sleepy. All thanks to adenosine. Everything is going smoothly, naturally, perfectly fine, until a troublemaker shows up. That troublemaker's name? Caffeine. See, as adenosine builds up, it binds to 2 main receptors in the brain, called A1 and A2 receptors. You don't need to know the deep science behind receptors, just think of them as signal messengers. And when adenosine binds to these receptors, we feel tired, drowsy, ready for sleep. So basically, every time you feel sleepy, that's adenosine linking up with A1 and A2 receptors. But caffeine is sneaky. When we drink coffee, tea, or energy drinks, caffeine enters our system and takes over the spots where adenosine should bind, those A1 and A2 receptors. The result? The process gets blocked. We no longer feel the natural urge to sleep. And in this little battle between adenosine and caffeine, caffeine often wins. It grabs those receptor spots, so the whole natural process, adenosine buildup leading to sleepiness, gets interrupted. So here's the key thing, my friends. As long as caffeine is present, the relationship between adenosine and its receptors can't happen. They're separated star-crossed lovers, which means you'll have a hard time feeling sleepy, even late at night. But when the caffeine wears off, then adenosine and the receptors finally get back together. And now you might be asking, so if I accidentally had coffee, when does the caffeine wear off? I had a cup at 11:30. When will it leave my system? Well, usually about 5 to 7 hours after drinking, around 50% of the caffeine is broken down and flushed out. That 50% process is called the half-life. Books and studies talk a lot about this term. Let's put it simply like this. Imagine there's a chart on the screen right now. If you drink coffee at 11:30 a.m., that's basically 100% caffeine in your system at that moment. About 7 hours later, around 6:30 p.m., half of that caffeine is gone. That means you still have about 50% left. Then another 7 hours later, at around 1:30 in the morning, you're still carrying about half of that 50%, so roughly 25%. Yes, at 1:30 a.m. So if you drink too much coffee, especially if you drink it several times a day, by the time it's 1:30 in the morning, you may still have a lot of caffeine in your system. And of course, that means it's going to be very hard to sleep. Or maybe you can still fall asleep thanks to your body's natural circadian rhythm, but the quality of your sleep won't be good, and very likely the root cause is right here. So the conclusion is this. For many people, having a big cup of coffee at 11:30 a.m. may not be the smartest idea, because by midnight, you could still have around 25% of that caffeine floating around in your body. And remember this. Caffeine interrupts the natural relationship between adenosine and its receptors, and that's why the little arrows in the sleepiness chart I just described, well, that natural sleepy feeling just doesn't come. Sometimes you feel exhausted but not sleepy, and that's exactly why you have to be careful. And here's the truth. We only know these things thanks to learning. Personally, I'm very grateful to the book Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, because that's where I first learned about this. Of course, I did more research on my own, but clearly, this is what learning gives us. Because of that learning, I was able to quit a very foolish habit of mine, drinking coffee late in the day and drinking way too much of it. The dangerous part of that habit is that it creates a vicious cycle of sleepless nights and then drinking more coffee. And the longer you keep that up, the worse it gets. Here's what happens. Because you don't sleep, you wake up groggy in the morning. When you're groggy, what do? You reach for more coffee. For some people, that means 3 cups a day. For others, 4 cups spread throughout the day. 1 in the morning, 1 at lunch, 1 in the afternoon, sometimes even 1 at night. And of course, it's not because we're intentionally trying to harm our health. It's just because we didn't know any better. But even unintentional mistakes can still do harm. The more coffee you drink, the worse you sleep at night. The worse you sleep, the more tired you feel the next morning. The more tired you feel, the more coffee you drink. Until one day you develop chronic insomnia. And at that point, it's no longer just about being sleepy, it becomes a full-blown health problem. And as you know, when sleep goes downhill, every single organ system in your body goes downhill with it. Not just your mind, not just your mood, but everything. That's why I keep saying, drinking coffee at the wrong time, in the wrong way, is actually dangerous. Now, of course, the half-life of caffeine, that 5 to 7 hours, differs from person to person. Some people metabolize it fast in maybe 4 or 5 hours. Some people metabolize it slowly, maybe 7 hours or even more. It varies. But even if we take the shorter side, 5 hours by midnight, you could still be carrying 25%. And if you had a large 200 milliliter cup at noon, or maybe an energy drink, or maybe tea, because tea has caffeine too, don't be surprised if you can't sleep. And for those of you who drink tea at night, that can be just as risky, because yes, tea also contains caffeine. So thanks to learning, we actually know what's right for our lives. I love coffee. You love coffee. That's fine, we can still enjoy it. But try to drink it early and avoid drinking it late. That's it. And if you still feel sluggish later in the day, instead of grabbing another cup, you can replace it with exercise, movement, or just stepping outside to breathe in some fresh air. That alone can wake you up. That's the power of learning, my friends. Without learning, we wouldn't know these things. I've talked with so many people who still drink coffee at night, and the only reason they do it is because they don't know the risks. Or they do know, but only vaguely. They can't really explain the harmful effects. Learning helps us explain these things, and once we can explain them, we can change our behavior. That's the beauty of education. That's the wonder of self-learning. It gives us positive habits. It gives us new insights. It gives us moments of clarity and awareness. Of course, as long as we're alive, we'll always make mistakes. That's guaranteed. But learning gives us the chance to see them and to change. But you see, there are so many things in life where we eventually recognize our own mistakes. The things we did wrong in the past, we correct them, we change them. And I believe that's when we actually grow as human beings. I also believe that what we call modern civilization probably has its roots in exactly this process. To me, the beauty of our character, our temperament, is more important than the beauty of tools or technology. At the end of the day, the way people treat each other with kindness and respect, that's something truly priceless in my philosophy of life. Of course, some of you might hear me say this and think, oh, that sounds so mechanical, so theoretical. And yes, when we apply these ideas only to ourselves, it might feel kind of abstract or even silly. But try applying it to the people around you. Do you want your parents, your children, the people you love most to live among kind and decent people? Once you think about it like that, the answer becomes clear. Sometimes we need to think beyond ourselves and consider the people around us, because then we can truly value and respect kindness and what we might call morality. Now, I know the word morality doesn't sit well with everyone. To be honest, there was a time in my own life when I thought all of this was nonsense. I didn't believe in morality. I didn't believe in human kindness. I thought life was simply about making money, pushing forward, and reaching a position of status. To me, that was success. Until one day, strangely enough, almost by accident, I came across the writings of Edgar Tolstoy. I'm sure many of you are familiar with his works. They're not difficult to read, even though they're a bit thick. And in those pages, I came across a concept I had heard of before, but never paid much attention to. Later, when I read it again, I began to see its depth. That concept is what we call oneness. Now, when I read about oneness, I only skimmed it at first, but later, through reflection and contemplation, I started to realize how profound it actually was. Of course, the way I understand it might not be the same as how the book originally presents it, because for me, I never take anyone's ideas wholesale. I only use what I've digested and made sense of for myself. I always interpret it in my own way, based on what I've learned. And so, in my own simple words, oneness is the harmony and mutual connection between the different parts that make up a greater whole. Within the whole, there are individual elements, but those elements are interconnected, supporting and depending on each other. When you harm one element, the whole is affected, and eventually it comes back to harm you too. Let me give you a simple example. We live in a world with air, with sunlight, with all these things around us. We depend on the air, right? In this universe, I could joke and say we're all just hooked on oxygen. Let me keep it very simple and down to earth. Our world has air, has sunlight. We are one element. Air is another element. Sunlight is another. Trees are another. Now imagine you cut down a tree or cut down a whole forest. You might not see immediately how you're connected to that tree, but if you think in terms of oneness, you'll see there's a connection through oxygen, through temperature, through humidity, through rainfall, storms, flooding. When you become aware of that, you realize you shouldn't cut that tree for selfish reasons. You don't need any lofty explanation. Just this: harming the tree will sooner or later harm you too. Maybe in the past you've already cut down trees. But today, if your mind has been awakened, if you understand your oneness with that tree, with that flower, with the air, with the sunlight, then you see that we are all part of one shared whole. And because we are part of that whole, we are interconnected, just like hands and feet, just like the organs of the human body. When one part is hurt, the others will hurt too. And we are part of that whole. So when the whole is damaged, how could we not be damaged too? Back in school, you probably read that old fable about the mouth. The hands, feet, eyes, nose, they all looked at the mouth and thought, wow, this guy has it easy. He just eats, doesn't do anything. They hated him, so they stopped working. They refused to bring food to the mouth. But what they didn't realize was that hands, feet, mouth, heart, liver, stomach, lungs, all of them were part of one whole, one oneness. And when one part was harmed, the others all suffered too. That's the story. Even from a young age, if we can understand that, we begin to feel the reality of oneness. And once we really grasp it in a very practical way, those lofty concepts of morality or philosophy don't feel abstract anymore. They become ordinary, down-to-earth truths. Because when we harm someone else, we're harming the whole. And once the whole is harmed, of course we ourselves will be harmed in return. Imagine at work, you dislike a colleague so much that you decide to sabotage them. But if you truly understand oneness, you'll realize this. Hurting one person damages the whole. And when the whole gets hurt badly enough, when conflict, breakdown, or failure happens, you too will be affected. Say your colleague gets stressed, makes mistakes, and productivity drops. The team fails. Maybe even the company fails. And if the company fails, don't tell me you won't be affected. Of course you will. It's that simple. Nothing deep, nothing complicated. That's oneness. When you understand this, you won't want to harm others anymore. Not because you're virtuous, but because you've recognized a law of life itself. Honestly, it's like a clean bucket of water. You drop a single drop of ink into it, just one drop. You might think, it's nothing, the water's still clear. But no, it's already contaminated. That shared bucket, the one we all depend on, is now polluted. And when the whole is damaged, all of us will eventually bear the consequences. Of course, if you dig deeper into this topic, it gets complex and long. But what I want to show you is this. For a person to change their character, to grow in temperament, there needs to be a foundation, and that foundation is learning. It's a powerful foundation, my friends. Learning is that wonderful. If I can't explain something clearly, then I won't live by it. Empty theory will never change anyone. Only deep understanding, when your mind and your heart are both awakened to the truth, can truly transform behavior. So I hope this episode has brought you some meaningful ideas like that. And if even one or two thoughts from this episode touched you, made you reflect, or simply made you feel a little lighter, I'd be so grateful if you could take a few seconds to hit like and subscribe. That way, whenever there's a new episode, we'll get to meet again. And if you think there's someone in your life who might need to hear this, feel free to share it with them. Who knows? Just one small idea might change a day, or even a whole life. Thank you for spending your time listening.